problem I had with this thing. If the lighting changes, then it bleaches it out. So, Skylar won't get that part of it. Or he'll have the audio, but not the video. Okay, any other questions there? But yes, you're absolutely right. So when we come down, should we be open on Mondays? You know, and then if you're a small business owner, now you're weighing non-monetary things, which is what I'm going to get into next, right? It's like, well, we need a day off. We can't work every day. You know, I don't trust the employees being there, whatever the story is. But there's some non-monetary things involved too. Okay, so that brings me to the next part of this. Well, actually, before, I'm going to add one more thing onto this before I leave this. If my total cost of production was $100,000 and I produced 10,000 units of whatever I'm producing, bottles of soda, cases of soda, $100,000, and I produced 10,000 of these babies, what's the average total cost? The average cost per unit, $10, right? So 10,000 units was Q. I produced 10,000 bottles. All of them cost me $100,000. How did you get that, Jesse? All right, you took your total cost and divided it by the quantity. Well, using our equation goggles, we can get a little more insight from this formula. You might want to rewrite this in your notes. Rewrite this part of the formula. And then I'm going to do the average part. So by dividing this by the number of units produced, we did what Jesse just said. This was the number produced. This is, of course, the total cost. So if it was $100,000 divided by 10,000 units, we got $10 per bottle. Now we got a little equation going on here. So what I do to one side of the equal sign, got to do to the other side. And how does that work with the Q? I could do a big divide by a big Q, but then I can also distribute that to each of the terms, right? So I can do this step. Now this is kind of nice, because now what we've got is total cost broke down into its variable cost and fixed cost components. And we've learned that if we divide by the number produced, we can also look at the averages, but maybe more importantly, the sum of the averages equals the total. So in our example, if the fixed costs were $60,000, if that was the total fixed cost, what is the average fixed cost? $60,000 worth of cost, fixed cost, so the building, the rent, all that stuff. And we're doing 10,000 units. How much? The average, 6, good. Right? So it's $6. So once we start to calculate that, we could say, oh, well, what's the variable then? If the total was 10, 4, right? So you see that's how that's working for us. Now we've got this kind of broke down into the variable components and the fixed components, which will help with our decision making. So this is the thing I want you to have kind of memorized off the top of your head. You might have to just regurgitate it a few times. But if you just trust me, this will come in handy as you work through some problems. This is about 5 different concepts all bundled into one expression. The sum of the averages equals the average total. variable cost plus fixed cost equals total cost. The formula for average total cost is that. The formula for average variable cost is that. The formula for average fixed cost is that. So you've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things going on with that little expression. All right, so let me put down just quickly here our little example again. So if total cost equals 100,000 and quantity equals 10,000, then average total cost equals $10 a unit. 100,000 divided by 10,000. If total fixed cost were 60,000 bucks with the buildings and all that stuff, we know that average fixed cost was equal to 6, which implies that variable cost must have been, average variable cost must have been 4. Gives us a quick way to kind of slice and dice problems. The economics creeps into this by knowing that we can only change variable costs. We can only change variable costs. So anytime we come in that day and we're thinking, hey, should I cut an employee or should I not? That's my only choice. I can't change my rent on my building or insurance policy. I can over a longer period. In fact, over a long enough period, how much are your fixed costs? Over a long enough period of time, this whole fixed cost, variable cost thing, if I'm looking over a longer time horizon, what are our fixed costs? What's fixed in the long run? Nothing, which is, I think, what you were getting at. There are no fixed costs in the long run. So what defines fixed cost is the fact that it's not changeable over the time period we're analyzing. But if you go a long enough time frame, anything can be changed. For most businesses today, maybe not a nuclear power plant, but I'd say darn near anything can be changed in 5 years. Whether you're John Deere making tractors or some small mom and pop restaurant making something, right? I mean, 5 years covers just about anybody. Probably 2 to 3 years covers just about anybody. So when we get into long-term planning, what you do in some of your other classes, maybe you've had some of those already, we tend to look at a 3 to 5 year planning time horizon, right? Because we can just about change anything. If something's broken now, if you can't fix it in 5 years and make money, then you should be out of business. You will be out of business, basically. If you can't change something, if you can't change your business model around to alter the resources at your disposal in such a way that you're profitable, then you need to go find something else to do. Okay, questions or comments there? All right, different distinction on cost. That's more of the economic way of thinking about things. And we're going to kind of show a distinction between accountants and economists. I've got a video on Rusty-Con Rocks that works through this in great detail. It's a restaurant example. So I'll give you those links for that if you want to look at this a little bit closer. But what we're making a distinction on is accounting versus economic costs. That'll ultimately lead us into profit, by the way, but we're going to focus in on cost at first. All right. What's your cost of taking this class? What's your cost of taking the class? Tuition. Books. Time. Money how? I just want to be more specific with money. Because you had tuition, books.
Oh, I meant money as far as time.
Okay.
Money.
On,
Working right now.
you could be working. Okay, so time,
I guess it's time.
I'll just add in here, could be working. Gas. Anything else you can think of?
Away from family.
Okay, away from family. Could be with family. Okay. Anything else?
How about I don't know how to say this, but it takes energy to think. It's a lot easier to sit and stay home and watch TV.
Yeah. Kind of a brain power trust. Takes energy, right? There's kind of a, and I guess we can probably phrase that back to time in some way, but you know what I mean? So your alternative could be watching TV. Okay, that's fair. All right, anything else? All right, so if we were to calculate costs and you were having a deduction for tax purposes, which you do get to write off some of your education expenses potentially, depending on a number of different complicated circumstances, right? So would the government allow you to claim all of this stuff?
Everything but time.
Okay, so you might be able to sneak in some gas and tuition and books, but the time element, they wouldn't buy. You could say, well, I could have been working, right? So we spent 3.5 hours tonight. I could have been earning $10, $20 an hour. You pick your number, whatever it is. So wasn't there a cost of $30 associated with that for each time, let alone the amount of time then outside of class too? Okay, so what we're kind of drawing on here is a distinction between implicit cost and explicit cost. So total cost, and let me be a little bit more specific, total opportunity cost, which is the opportunity cost that we were talking about earlier with Tom and Jen. Has two components: explicit cost and implicit cost. So Denise, what would you be doing if you weren't at school tonight?
Probably watching TV.
Watching TV, okay. So Ryan, what would you be doing?
On the internet.
Okay, Jesse?
What I'm doing?
Yeah, what would you be doing if you weren't doing what you're doing?
Playing lightsabers with my son.
Okay, Justin?
Don't lie, be honest.
8:45.
Yeah, they go on the
Okay, Gustavo?
patio. Could be checking my email
Okay, Jesse?
Studying for a different class.
Studying for a different class. Gabby? Working. All right, so we got you guys doing everything. So is our implicit cost all of those things? I mean, Ryan, you brought up work to begin with. So is it possible that you could be working, you could be watching TV, you could be internet surfing? So is your opportunity cost all of those things? Is that your cost? If you're like, well, what's it cost me? Well, I could have been doing this, I could have been doing this, I could have been doing this. So do I add up all of those things and say, that's what it cost me? Gabby, what do you think?
No, because you can't be doing all of them at one time.
You can't be doing them all at one time. You have lots of options, but what your opportunity cost is the thing you would have done. That's one thing, right? It's the thing you would have done if you didn't do what you did. So that's my little Dr. Seuss saying for opportunity cost. So opportunity cost for the implicit cost is the thing you would have done. It's the highest valued alternative foregone. The highest valued alternative foregone. When we think about all these other options, the highest valued alternative foregone. Now, back to the explicit cost. Let me start with gas. So if you had to fill your tank and you drove in, Gabby, did you come from Lawrence, you were saying? Do you live in Lawrence?
No, I live here, but I work in Lawrence.
Oh, you were working in Lawrence. Okay, so some of you might have longer commutes than others. Where do you live, Jesse? You must live...
I live in Gardner.
In Gardner, okay.
Normally I work in Overland Park, but I drove here from Gardner today.
Right, okay. So we might have different levels of gas. And so if you, and you have different cars for that matter, right? If you're driving a Prius versus a old 1970s muscle car or a Tahoe or something, getting 15 miles to the gallon compared to 50, right? So let me, just to get a number going, Gabby, what do you think you spent in gas?
Fill up my tank? Or
No, just for the amount. Like, you kind of have to eyeball it. 20 miles to Lawrence, for instance. So if you get
probably like $20.
$20, not if you. What did you drive?
I
Tahoe.
drive a Tahoe. It's about 75 you can fill the whole thing.
So
maybe like,
but 15. So round trip, you might have been getting up there a gallon of gas. If you got 15 to 20 miles a gallon, maybe, or something like that. So 2.5 gallons of gas, maybe, or something. If we're talking round trip, I just want to put a price tag on it for a moment. $3.29. So what are we at? $3.30, $6.60, something. Let's just call it $7.50 worth of gas. Okay, just for argument's sake. Explicit cost or implicit cost?
it would be
Explicit, right? It's easy to read, and in fact, the IRS might let you take gas, some sort of estimate of gas off, right? So it's an accounting cost. It's an explicit cost, something that the accountant could buy into. Whereas the time with your family or the time working, or this is kind of a judgment call over here potentially, right? So the explicit cost is still part of your opportunity cost. That's the last part I want to think about, or almost the last part, of that part, part E to subsection D. What else could you have bought? Books, a couple sodas and a candy bar, right? So anyway, your opportunities are very explicit. When you spent $7.50, the IRS, the government, your mom and dad, and your friends know what that means in terms of your lost opportunities, right? $3 worth of candy and $4.50 worth of big Gatorade and an energy drink or whatever, right? So we add up in the marketplace, we know what $7.50 will buy. Those are also lost opportunities. So we've got explicit lost opportunities, things that we spent cold hard cash on, and then we've got implicit costs that are a little bit harder. They're estimates of money that we may or may not have lost that can't be counted on the IRS books. The accountant's not going to accept those as write-offs in general. Okay, so that is our total cost, and this is the way an economist figures out total cost. We always include implicit costs for a very important reason. It helps us with decision making. It helps us make better decisions by including all the costs. When I thought about whether I should take classes, I thought about the lost time with my family. I maybe didn't pull out a spreadsheet and really estimate the dollar value of an extra 3 hours with my 14-year-old son. You know, is that the extra hours that's going to put him in jail when he's 18? Or is it okay to give up those 4 hours, right? I mean, it's a gut shot feeling. We don't know what that is always. But we're taking it into consideration as part of the total cost of class. Okay. Tuition. And books could probably fall into this category too. I know, some of you guys have assistantships or different deals and stuff, but let's just say an off-the-shelf price for Ottawa per hour is $5.75. And this is a how many hour class? 3. All right. So, how does that factor in to your cost of whether you should come to class tonight or not?
Well, you're putting the money out there, so you already paid it before you took the class, so it'd be just a waste of money if you didn't go.
You took me in 2 different directions there. One I liked and the other I didn't. So, who else wants to add on to that?
Which part did you like?
That I won't tell.
Well, if you multiply those 2 numbers, you can divide it by 8 to see how much each costs.
Okay, good. So we've got, what do we got here? 1,500 plus 150, 1,650, what, 1725? So we got 1725 divided by 8 would give us tonight's class average cost. You with us on that, Denise?
I am.
What do you think about adding that cost in tonight for the cost of coming to class tonight? Your choice. You guys are all here tonight, except for Skylar. Should that cost be factored into your decision? You're going to have the same thing next week, right? You're going to wake up Monday morning. Oh, I know economics would be a lot of fun, but I've got these other opportunities. I could be watching TV. I could be working. I could be doing this. I could be doing that. You're going to face that same thing. Does that 1,725 divided by 8, by the way, somebody do that
It's
for
about
me.
like $2.15.
$2.15 a night. Woo! Should that factor in to your decision?
Well,
That's a judgment call.
I don't think that's why we're here. I think you get it. I think we're here to get an MBA, right? None of us get an MBA. Yeah.
I don't want to confuse the benefits, which are super high, by the way, way higher than $2.15.
No, I know.
But I don't want to confuse the benefits with the cost, because we're going to separate that out. That's what this whole cost-benefit analysis, which we'll be doing more of next week. But we kind of isolate, well, what are the benefits of coming tonight? What are the costs of coming tonight? Right now, I just want to focus in on the cost of coming next week tonight or tonight. One way to do it would be the $2.15. Should that be a part of your cost part of the life?
Roman advisory says no.
So tell me about this $2.15 in terms of if you don't come, do you not pay? You still pay. So should that enter into your costs of going if it's not refundable back to you?
Well, if you flunk, you have to pay again.
Yeah, that might be a longer term consideration.
Buying an expensive car, leave it in the garage, getting out of it.
Okay, so should money that was already spent enter into your decision of whether you should come that night. So again, let's kind of put ourselves into the future, into next week, Monday morning. Is the cost of coming to class, is that a relevant cost? It's not a relevant cost. It's a sunk cost. So you guys are going to read about sunk cost fallacy. That type of cost does not belong in your decision of whether you should come that night or not. Do people do it? Yes, they have this guilt and they got different things, but that's inefficient in terms of thinking about whether you should go on a particular night. That cost, now there's other things that need to be included. Should the gas be included? Would you avoid the gas bill if you didn't come? So you would. So, but we're back to this variable cost, fixed cost thing kind of, right? So the only cost that's relevant to coming on a given night is the gas cost. Books paid for, tuition's paid for, that's what it's costing you to come, and time with the family, or time that you could be doing one of these other options. You also gave that up, so that's a cost of coming. So that implicit cost plus the little bit of explicit cost, whatever that might be, those are the relevant costs in the decision.
I have a question.
Yes?
So you're telling us that's a relevant cost to the decision, but isn't the decision based on your judgment? Of how you perceive it? So how is tuition considered a sunk cost?
If it's a cost that's not recoverable, it's sunk. So if a cost cannot be recovered, it's sunk. And therefore, we make lots of decisions. Like, you guys could have avoided the tuition cost by not taking the class, right? So at that time, tuition was relevant. I'm not denying that. So now, do I take the course? Do I not? $1,725 or not? I chose the plunge. Yes. I'm in a different reality now, right? The reality's changed that I've spent the $1,725, it's gone. Should I come tonight? What's the extra cost? Is it efficient? What are the benefits? All that awesome education stuff that's way valuable. So you got missing out on a class, not getting the letter grade, all those things you need to take. Those are on the benefit side of coming. But on the cost side, you've got the $750 worth of gas and maybe any other miscellaneous explicit costs. Now you do your marginal analysis of whether you should go. Do the benefits outweigh the cost? If the benefits are more than the cost, then you should do it. Therein lies one of the interesting things, is that now the cost is lower of actually going, right? Because we've eliminated part of that. We're not thinking, because it's sunk, it's not relevant. So effectively, the cost is lower, and now you still got the benefits, hopefully, of each night's of enriching experiences that you get from coming to managerial economics, right? That hasn't changed. So it actually makes your decision easier, in theory, to leave that cost out. But you still got, if the kid broke his arm and he's in the hospital, you got to skip. I mean, the benefits of going don't outweigh the cost.
So our book's sunk cost.
The book is sunk, yes. Once it's bought and paid for, I think if you drop the class next week, you probably could get a refund. I don't know what their policy is. You guys should read that little tiny print. But at some point, it'll be not refundable. So it might be recoverable at this point. But that's a different decision, right? Because you're just deciding, should I go tonight or not whether I should drop the course or not. That's a different decision. But you see how economics is art. It's an art form. It's not just accounting. It's situational. Where are you at today? What are all the relevant costs? What are all the relevant benefits? This is the art form of economics. This is more of the accounting. We can all kind of get our arms around that. Accountants understand this. This is an art form to really take the situation, analyze the benefits, analyze the costs, and make a decision. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay. I'm going to go ahead. I think this might be dipping a little bit into. Let me see where these are. I think this is a good spot to do it since we've come this far. I can't remember if it's might be a little bit later, but all we're going to do is graph these curves. So I like to think of the math we're going to use in this course with 3 sets of goggles. I require my students to have 3 sets of goggles. And the 3 sets are equation goggles, which we've been exposed to. We've had those on. And graphing goggles, and then schedule goggles. You guys had your schedule goggles on earlier. Do you remember when we gave Tom and Jen's production quantities? And it was like 8 coconut, 8 fish. And so we could set that up in a table where we've got coconuts and fish for Tom, and he could have 8 and 8, or he could have 4 and 12, right? So that was a schedule of numbers. Then we turned it into the little point A and point B and graphed it. And then we also did the little equation where we said, okay, 8 fish can be traded for 8 coconuts. We were using math in 3 different ways, right? Schedule goggles, graphing goggles, equation goggles. And so you can think about that each time you see an equation in this course. There is some graph that would support that. And that's where you get into supply and demand and all these other graphs. So we'll be doing some graphing, but just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Equation, graphing, and schedule goggles. All right, so start you off with this fixed cost. What did we say it was? 100,000? No, 60,000. So we had 60,000 worth of cost, and we were measuring quantities of soda. I guess there were cases of soda or 6-packs or something. And if I was to graph the total fixed cost curve, or graph, or line, or whatever it looks like, in this 2-dimensional space, what would it look like? So remember, this goes 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, 10,000. Maybe we could even go 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Right?
How many did we say we had? 100,000?
10,000. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
So you draw a dot there and draw a line from that
To the 60, okay?
Right?
So right there. What if we had produced 5,000? Where would that be? Halfway between here and here. Good. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what if we were at 4,366? Pretty soon we'd have so many dots together that they would start to resemble a line, right? So that is our total fixed cost relationship or function. No matter what quantity we produce, my total fixed cost is 60,000 bucks. What does the average fixed cost function look like? Can you see that graph okay, Denise?
Yeah.
What do you think about the average fixed cost? Do you remember what the average fixed cost was on the little example we did earlier? $6, that's correct. Yep, it was $6 because we were producing 10,000 units. It was $6. So where would that point be on this 2-dimensional space? So let me just, this is the 10,000 unit mark. So at $6, go up to 6. Obviously not drawn to scale here, right? But this would be a $6 here somewhere along the vertical axis. What does the rest of it look like?
What do you mean?
So we did it for total fixed cost, was a flat line. I'm graphing the average fixed cost function. What would that line look like, or that relationship?
Is that a line somehow between the 6 and the 60 line?
Yeah,
make
use
that
some
up.
numbers. How much would our average fixed cost be if we produce 1 unit, 1 soda? What would be our average fixed cost?
6.
Nope.
Maybe 60,000.
60,000, right?
Oh.
So average fixed cost is total fixed cost divided by the quantity. If I was producing 1, again, this thing's not really to scale, there's number 1 right there. We go all the way up basically to 60,000. What is it at 5,000? Pull out those calculators. What do you got?
Divided by how much?
60,000 divided by, if we cut this in half to 5,000, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. $12,000, $12, $12. Good. So we double our 6 to 12.
Okay, you got that by 60,000 divided by 10.
No.
Divided by 5.
5,000. Because now I'm saying hypothetically, what if we produce 5,000 units? We would have average fixed cost of $12.
No.
At 10,000 units, we have average fixed cost of $6.
Okay.
At 1,000 units, we have average fixed cost of $60. Good. I can feel the momentum shifting here. All right, I don't know exactly what this looks like, but if we started to put, it's not going to be a line. I do know that.
Even curve.
It's going to be a curve. It's going to fall really dramatically because, by the way, if I produce 2 units instead of 1, what's the average fixed cost? $30,000. So now we go from 60 to 30. You can see how poorly I drew the scaling system here. But that would be 30,000. So 2 units would be here. So this thing falls really steeply. And then it comes down, comes out through here. And if we produce 1,000,000 units,
It'll get as close to the line as it can.
yeah, right? It gets
So the more you produce, the cheaper it is.
You got it.
Okay.
So that's the volume type concept, right? If we produce a lot, we can drive our average fixed cost down to
that's
next to
Walmart.
nothing. This is Walmart. You got it.
Down Ottawa.
There's Walmart. There's the mom and pop grocery store. Yes. That is it. All right. So this is the concept of just getting volume out there, driving down your fixed costs, your overhead costs. You've heard of that, right? So the cost, what's overhead? Well, it's the cost of your building, your salaried managers, all of that kind of stuff. The more volume we have, the more inventory turnover we have, the more Q we sell, the lower that average is. That's going to end up increasing my profit per unit, right? Because if I think about the profit equation as total revenue minus total cost, I can do a little, I don't want to call it a trick, but a little magic here with the P's and Q's. So remember, total revenue was, how do we calculate total revenue? Units times price. Price times quantity. Good. Now, for total cost, I could substitute in my average total cost per unit and kind of make it look like this, right? If I take my average total cost per unit, multiply times the number of units, that is total cost. See that? Right? We had our little thing that we're going to all memorize for next week. We had total cost divided by quantity equals average total cost. Multiply it by quantity, we get this. Now, we got a Q here and we got a Q here. Now I'm really pushing you. What can we do algebraically to simplify this expression?
Divide them on the other side.
We can, no, I don't want to, I want to leave this side the same, but there's one little step I can do since I have a common factor in here. I can't just delete it, but I can factor it out, right? Remember that? It's kind of like dividing by Q, but I just think of it as sucking the Q out of here, right? So we got, this could be re-expressed as the difference between price per unit and average total cost per unit times the number of units gives me total profit now. That makes sense, right? If I think about it I'm just thinking about it on a per unit basis. I sell this for $1.75. I have $1 worth of cost into it. I make 75 cents per unit. So we'll often look at per unit basis as much as kind of on the big scale. That's part of the reason we do this. All right, so how do we make more money? Well, if we sell more and we take this maybe a step further, which this is, I am going into uncharted territory, which I just love. That's what part of the reason I love teaching. I've never done this before. Price minus average variable cost minus average fixed cost times quantity. See what all I did? Suck that in there because we know that average total cost is the sum of average variable and average fixed. I had the little minus sign that I went through, but I'm just subtracting off back to our $6 worth of this and $4 worth of this, right? So I got price minus my total cost. If I continue to increase the volume, my average fixed cost falls, making my profit go up, right? So that's one way to ramp up profits because you have two effects. You're bringing in more revenue because price times quantity remains, but better yet, you've driven down costs. So you're actually having less cost per unit as well, on average. So there's kind of a double whammy effect there, which is kind of cool. That's part I hadn't seen before. So let's put a new key point here. As quantity increases, average fixed cost falls, leading to more profit. Which is what we kind of all knew along. That's why Walmart's in business and having scale of production. But now we kind of see it with our equation goggles on here, on how that all fits together with variable costs and fixed costs. Okay. Any last questions or comments there? I kind of skipped over the easy one, by the way. If Q goes up and price stays the same, then revenues go up too on that side. Total revenue is going to go up. So sales are good. Revenues are going to go up. But this is kind of the hidden feature that you might not have thought about before, that we might be able to drive down our average fixed cost per unit. Okay, now on to the little bit tougher ones. Average variable and average total. I'm going to start a new graph for this. And this is material that you guys will come back to when you're reading. He's going to say something in the text and just assume that you know this. This is part of what I was giving to you, that you're going to, having a little bit of these fundamentals down is going to help you when you work through that. All right. average total cost looks like this. Just trust me. Under most circumstances, it's kind of a bowl-shaped, U-shaped look. Now I want you to put a big fat dot right in the minimum point. That turns out to be kind of an important point for us. So that's where average total cost is minimized. That point, as we were working through other graphs, remember, is associated with a specific quantity down here. At that quantity, given the size of the building, the insurance, the blah, 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 all those expenses, average costs are minimized. So this is a special point showing the minimum of average total cost. And you might want to just make sure you put that dotted line because it's at this quantity, whatever that happens to be. Let's sing it. Oh, Tom Edwards.
Oh,
He just sent me an email. I guess I got that thing on full blast here. All right, average variable cost. Now watch this carefully. Don't start writing too soon because this is where it gets a little slippery. So I want you to start somewhere over here, come down, bottom up, and then narrow the gap. Narrow the vertical gap. That is the average variable cost curve. And then I want you to put a fat dot where that one bottomed out. It should have bottomed out somewhere to the left of where this one bottomed out. So however you draw it is fine. Just make sure that it's kind of, that vertical distance is narrowing as you go up.
And that's A, B, C.
Yes, this is the average variable cost. So, for an extra credit point, why is this vertical distance narrowing? Good. That's part way there, but you're not at the meat of the answer. But the quantity's getting higher. That's part of it.
Oh,
Jesse?
because your average fixed costs are becoming more and more less relevant, and it's all in variable costs. It's
So-
percent proportional wise.
Okay, you're hitting on it now. You're dangerously close, so I'm ready to give you a point here. What is this vertical distance? Might be another way to phrase it. It is your average fixed cost. Yes. So, Ryan, you got the juices flowing here as quantity was going up. Now, the costs on average are going up, by the way, right? Look at what's happening here. If I analyze this quantity, let's call it Q2, and this quantity Q3, the average cost per unit of producing, let's just say 600 units, was this amount. The average cost per unit was this amount. We hang a left and read off this number. Maybe it's $46. When I produced 660 units, again, just making up numbers, the average total cost went up to $48 per unit. My average total cost went up. However, rest assured, as Jesse pointed out here, the vertical distance is the average fixed cost. This distance is what? What's this vertical height up to that point? Average variable cost. This is where you guys got to start getting comfortable reading the graphs. This is how we use the graphs. You're going to see a lot of graphs on the paper. at this quantity, we go up to the function. If it's an average variable cost function, we hang a left. That number that's measured in dollars represents the average variable cost per unit. The average variable cost plus the average fixed cost equals the average total cost. There's the sum of the averages equaling the average total. So that's what's going on. It shrinks when we did 660. Now this vertical height is smaller. So average fixed costs fell. Variable costs, though, shot up. And so there was this kind of counteracting thing going on that we're going to spend some more time on later that was offsetting that. So variable costs jumped bigger. So if you wanted to look at it this way, the jump here was bigger than the savings there, right? Giving us an overall up of $2, a net effect of $2. So there's a lot of interesting things going on with the dynamics. So we could draw the average fixed cost. That's why I drew it first. We usually don't because it's kind of repetitive, right? Now that we know that the vertical distance is that, we really don't need to draw it because it's already there. Okay, who's got questions on that?
So, can you repeat that again? Why is the average fixed cost goes down? I understand it's because the quantity goes up. Right?
Okay, that's back to this, yes. So the fixed costs remain the same no matter how much we produced. Therefore, when we produce more, this expression has Q getting bigger, making the overall expression getting smaller. And so as that goes, that's just this distance. That's why we drew it the way we did. Now, the reasons why the cost curves look this way is a different story. So I want to tell you a couple other simplifying things that we'll build on next time. So I want you to note some important things here. Note. All right, so these are the most general cost curves. Your textbook is going to make some simplifying assumptions to make your life easier, but it could confuse you if you didn't know this, by holding variable costs fixed. So they might say that each cost per unit is $3. So you can keep making units at $3, make as many as you want. Ultimately, the average variable cost is going to be a flat line looking at this. Okay, so that's a simplifying assumption. The marginal cost, which we haven't even covered yet, but I want to add that to this note. So this is the way the general, which we will use the general ones too. This is the general curves. But, the big but, we often simplify by assuming constant cost. The question will state that. So it'll say, let's assume that these costs are constant at blah, blah, blah. And then the graph would be a straight line rather than this curved line. Okay? Questions, Denise?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're about out of time for questions because we're about ready to call it a night. We're getting close, dangerously close. Anybody? So all of this stuff relates. This picture ties into, you know, the total cost equals total variable cost plus total fixed. Divide by the quantities. I can't iterate enough to really have this memorized. Memorize it first, understand it second. absolutely memorize it, and it'll make your life a lot easier. And you'll start to understand it as you do it more and once you start to apply it. But, and bear in mind, the text all of a sudden is going to say, suppose average fixed costs are this, and you'll have to kind of backdoor to getting the total fixed cost. So that's why you're really using it the way I presented it. And you'll have to manipulate it to get some answers. So this kind of work in harmony. And I will leave you hopefully in equilibrium now. We'll call it a night. I've got all of my